with the Venom writer, Cullen Bunn. Thanks for talking to us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And you live in St. Louis, right?
I do, yeah. I've lived here for, I guess, closing in on 20 years, which is hard to believe, but yeah.
And I love your drinking Diet Mountain Dew also. That's the drink of God. That's what I drink too.
Well, at 6 o'clock on a Saturday, it's about the only thing that keeps me moving.
Well, did you work? I read on your website you worked at a comic book shop too as a young kid. Is that right?
I did. Well, I don't know how young I was, but yeah, I worked at the fantasy shop here in St. Louis.
Right.
That was I worked there for a couple of years.
And how'd you break in?
It's actually I met an artist who was also working a fantasy shop, and we did a book together. And we did one book together, and then a couple of years later we did a book called The Damned, and then a couple of years later we did a book called The Six Gun, and both of those were published by Oni Press, and then that book has been sort of the gateway to DC and Marvel. That was the book that introduced them to me.
How'd you break in with Marvel? What was the first conversation, or how'd you get in the door?
I had meetings with Marvel at conventions and stuff, and I pitched them some things that never went anywhere. I pitched them a Morbius series years ago, like 6 years ago. I pitched a Morbius series that didn't go anywhere, but they had seen some of my work, and I just kept kind of knocking on the door. It wasn't until The Six Gun came out, though, and Axel Alonso read The Six Gun, and he contacted me and asked if I wanted to do a few Deadpool stories and things like that, things really started coming together.
I think it was Deadpool Team Up. Is that what got you started?
Yeah, I did Deadpool Team Up, and I did some like short stories in some of the Deadpool like 1000 and some of those issues.
Talk about the Venom book. How did that come about?
Well, Venom was something I had done some work for Steve Wacker in the Spider-Man offices. I did Spider-Man Season 1. And he contacted me after that project was finished and said, we have another book we'd like you to consider. And he basically told me that Rick Remender was transitioning off the book and asked if I wanted to co-write the final arc, the Savage 6 arc, with Rick, and then take over after that.
Steve Wacker's a St. Louis guy too.
He is a St. Louis guy. I kid him that he brings a lot of St. Louis guys into his office because Chris Somney, Matt Kent, they all work with Steve Wacker at some point.
He also mentions the Cardinals a lot in the letter pages, I know.
He does. He's a big Cardinals fan.
Your first introduction to Spider-Man, how did you get involved? Was it Electric Company on Channel 9?
I don't think that was my first introduction to Spider-Man. I remember watching the live-action show when I was very young. I remember that. But I believe I was the kid, I had some, I used to get my comics at garage sales all the time, big stacks, flea markets, and I remember drawing eyeballs on Spider-Man throughout issues of comics, which are probably now worth thousands of dollars because they were very early. I remember, it's clear in my head that I was drawing eyeballs on Ditko Spider-Man issues, but I remember that even from when I was very young. So.
Just one of your favorite characters of all time?
Yeah, I think Spider-Man is. I don't think many people are going to say they're not a Spider-Man fan at some level. He's this is a character I remember being very young. I had older brothers, and they had these little plastic Spider-Men on parachutes, and we were throwing them out of the upstairs window of the house and stuff. And he's just a character that speaks to me. He's iconic, and yeah, I'm just a huge Spider-Man fan.
How about introduction to Venom? Did you start with 300 of Amazing, or how did you?
Well, I remember a friend of mine coming into the gym at school during the school day and said, "Have you seen this issue of Secret Wars where Spider-Man has a new costume?" So yeah, it was very, and it was from that point, and I remember, being introduced to Venom from there. I wasn't a huge fan of Venom in the 90s when he was super popular with the Eddie Brock stuff. That wasn't my favorite era of comics anyway. But yeah, I remember, Venom from the very early days. I thought it was a really interesting idea and a very cool way to introduce a new character, a new villain.
How about the introduction of Flash wearing the suit? When you heard about that idea, what went through your mind?
I wasn't sure how to take it because I was a guy, I'm a guy that, Flash has always been that bully to me, and I didn't know when I first heard that's what they were going to do. I wasn't sure I could get past that with Flash, but I think that the way Rick handled it very early on, he made Flash a relatable character.
All right, we also have some message board questions for you. We've got Dan Gavosden, I guess. In the Venom series, do you ever plan on reuniting Peter Parker with Flash Thompson or revealing each other's identity to each other?
People are going to ask a lot of spoilery questions, aren't they? It's something that I've talked to editorial about. I think that at some point that's coming. It's not something that I'm going to be doing anytime soon, though.
He also wants to know if we're going to get back to the original concept of the numbered missions that Venom has.
I think that's something that I kind of feel like got dropped off completely anyway. I think we're past that. It was something Rick kind of wrote out of the series in a lot of ways, and then even more when he was doing Venom and Secret Avengers, and I think that idea has kind of dropped off. I always wanted to get back to some Project Rebirth stuff, and I kind of had this idea of what would happen when Project Rebirth shows back up. So we'll see, but I don't know that you'll see those numbered that number of missions again.
We got one from Great Scott in regards to the Toxin Symbiote. In the Toxin miniseries that introduced a character appeared that Toxin was gaining a morality from the host, yet now he just appears to be another murderous symbiote without the sense of right or wrong and killing. I was wondering if this change would ever be addressed.
It will. I'm doing an arc right now in Venom that's called Toxin. That is very much the story of Eddie Brock. Now Eddie Brock and the Toxin symbiote are bonded. Toxin, the symbiote, hates Venom now because of what Rick had. Rick had Venom attack Toxin and beat it within an inch of its life. And Toxin hates the symbiote. Eddie Brock hates Venom. And those two are now bonded together. And when they were first bonded, it was very much a murderous, monstrous, really more of a monster than a person. In the new arc, you're going to see Eddie and the symbiote have kind of started coming to an agreement of sorts. And you'll see, I'm not saying that it's the same sense of morality it got from its previous host, but you will see a different approach to the symbiote.
Any chance we'll see off panel that Toxin original guy died? A lot of us spider geeks are like, what happened to him?
I will.
No, you're not the blood.
I will refer you straight back to Mr. Amender on that. I have no plans to really show any more than Rick says that he died off panel, and I have no plans right now to address that, really.
Big Al, what are some of your personal favorite Venom-centric storylines? It can be any incarnation of the character.
I liked when he first appeared. I like when Venom first came on and he was kind of scary, really scary, because you didn't know what was going to happen with him. And I liked that era. And then I like what they've done with Eddie a little bit with the cancer and anti-venom. I liked all of that stuff. That was probably my big intro to it.
Anyone you hate? You can't stand?
Any character I hate?
No, any Venom, because there was so many during the 90s that came out.
There were a lot. I didn't like the she. Was it she? There was the she Venom.
That was his wife.
Yeah, I didn't like that. I just didn't like that general idea, and that concept kind of bugged me. But yeah.
And Scarlet Spider. I'm glad Venom moved to Philly during the current run. As a person from Delaware who had family, including his father, grew up in Philly, I'm very familiar with Philly, and I won't lie, the Gallery Mall reference made me smile in issue 28. Why Philly? You're a St. Louis kid.
Yeah, I would have moved Venom to St. Louis, but that a lot of people think that's a funny idea just in itself. I think my editor at the time knew a lot about Philly, and he actually, when I took over the series, there were a couple of things he said, a couple of things we really want to make sure happens, and he came to me and said, we want Venom to move to Philly. It was sort of like an edict right up from front. And I kind of said, well, why Philly? But once I started working on it, I kind of think Philly's a great location for Flash. It's a place where he can kind of establish himself, and it has its own. The city does have its own character, and it's kind of cool.
Did you have to make a field trip there to find it?
I have not made a field trip to Philly. No, I've been to Philadelphia before, but obviously not doing reference for a comic book.
And are there any plans for Venom to interact with we call him Spock on the website?
Spock. I think there are plans out there, but that's pretty much all I can say.
Let's see. And the Scarlet Spider solicitation says that Kane is using the events of Superior to his advantage, meaning that Superior is affecting the satellite books. Will the same be happening in Venom, or is Venom moving to Philly, way to avoid the events of Superior?
Well, I don't think it was necessarily intended to be a way to avoid Superior, and I've even made references now in some of the current arc. Flash saying that for some reason Peter won't return his calls anymore and things like that. But I don't think it's something that I wanted to be a big. I would rather it be Flash's story and Venom's story rather than making it be a big, something big. I don't want Superior to be too impactful on it right now.
What's your favorite Venom look throughout the years? His favorite is classic McFarlane.
That's a good look, but I really do like the current Venom look. I like the Soldier Agent Venom. I think that's a cool look for him.
You got a Marvel Select coming out that looks really cool.
I saw that. I really want that figure.
That looks awesome. For years, I always felt Marvel used Venom too much, and as a result caused the character to sink a little. When the book was announced, a lot of people had reservations of the titles, saying it would fail to the character's past history with the standalone titles during the Brock era. So far, the book is the longest-running Venom book to date. When you got on the book, did you have any reservations of your own about the character, even though Flash has been Venom for a while?
No, I don't think so. Every book I approach is, I know that there's sort of I know how books work, and I know how the comic buyers work, and I know how books are going to last. So, when I took the book, I think Venom was a book that a lot of people were surprised lasted as long as it did when I took over. And, I just approached, I wanted to have fun writing a story, and I wanted to tell the best Venom stories I could. And the only reservations I have is sometimes I say I always plan for the long game, and I always kind of think, man, what if the book doesn't make it to that long game? But that's just the nature of comics now. So it's always something I think about, but I'm just going to try to barrel ahead.
My buddy Bertoni loves Betty Brant. He wrote a series of articles, Bertoni Hates Betty. And he says, what would happen if Betty Brant got the symbiote?
She would just take it out on Flash. She would get revenge on Flash for all his mistreatment of her over the years.
Well, she blew up his apartment in the 80s. I mean, that's
pretty extreme. Or maybe she just show him how it's really done, because Flash is kind of a screw up when it comes to being a hero. Maybe she just do it right.
What do you think of Betty Brant? I mean, she's not in the book anymore, or is she coming back?
I have no plans to bring her back right now. I think I like Betty Brant as a character. I just kind of feel like she was getting to a point where she was going to have to check herself into some therapy, probably, because so many bad things were happening, and I kind of like, she was such a part of Flash's life, so when he moved to Philly, I felt like he needed to forge new paths and introduce some new characters.
Max Frankow, will Flash and Peter, whether he's Ock or back to normal by the time it happens, have a team up and finally figure out each other's identities?
Well, I know that fans hate hearing this, but you'll have to wait and see. You'll have to wait and see. Sorry, guys, really.
And when will Flash be rid of the demon that's currently inside of him?
Never. No. It's a story I wanna tell and get rid of that. I do want to resolve that demon story, and hopefully I'll have that chance. There were just some other stories I wanted to tell in between there. I didn't want to do supernatural story. I wanted to do some street level stories in there and mix it up a little bit.
Speaking of Hellstrom, you probably get this all the time. There's multiple Hellstroms all throughout the Marvel universe. What's up with Hellstrom?
There are multiple Hellstroms, and as much as the answer is often, well, it's a chronology thing. You're reading them out of order. That doesn't work. I tried to make it work in my head. It doesn't work. So I do have the answer to why there's so much confusion in Hellstrom. I think it's a cool answer, and at some point, somewhere, I'm going to tell that story.
Last one from Jesse. What's your opinion of the Venom's current power set? Are there any capabilities that you think are a little too convenient?
I don't think so, and I kind of like the idea of expanding it a little bit, and I did a little bit of that when the Demon was in control in the UFOs story. The Demon was doing some things that Venom necessarily had not done before. I think there's some underused things. I love Venom's camouflage ability, and I think it's not been used to its fullest, and I like doing some things with that. I don't know that there are any real overused or powers that make him that are a little too convenient. I like the power set he has. I think it's actually a very diverse power set.
All right, let's talk about what's coming up. You got Fearless Defenders coming out.
Yep, Fearless Defenders, the second issue came out a couple of weeks ago. The third issue will be out in another couple of weeks. And then, of course, Venom, we're right in the middle of the Toxin arc, which I really believe, I'm hoping, I've just seen the art for it. A lot of people say, when are they going to finally fight? Because we kind of delay it. My goal is, I just read the issue where they finally face off and fight, and it's a pretty brutal match. And I think, not to give too much away, I think longtime Venom fans are going to get what they really want out of this battle. So I'm looking forward to seeing what people think of it.
All right, Cullen, you did great. Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks, guys.